The huge metal doors of the Galactic Council meeting room slid open with a deep, rumbling sound. Inside, beings from across the galaxy sat around a massive circular table. The room was filled with creatures that looked nothing like humans. Some had scales that shimmered like oil on water. Others had too many arms or eyes that glowed in the dark. The air smelled strange, like burned metal mixed with something sweet and rotten. Captain Jake Morrison walked into the room slowly. His boots made quiet clicking sounds on the smooth floor. Behind him came 3 other humans, all wearing the dark blue uniforms of Earth's space fleet. They looked very small compared to the alien beings who filled the enormous chairs around them. Ambassador Zixithara was the first to speak. She was a Velthari, which meant she looked like a giant lizard that could walk on 2 legs. Her skin was covered in green and black scales that moved when she breathed. Her yellow eyes had no whites in them, just pure golden color that seemed to glow from inside. "So the humans finally arrive," she said in a voice that sounded like rocks grinding together. "We have been waiting to see this famous warship of yours." She pressed a button on the table in front of her. A blue light appeared in the air above the table, and slowly it formed into the shape of a spaceship. It was the HSS Defiant, the newest and strongest ship that Earth had ever built. To human eyes, it looked powerful and dangerous, but compared to the alien ships floating outside the station, it looked like a toy. The other aliens around the table began to make sounds. Some laughed, which sounded like metal scraping against stone. Others clicked their teeth or made buzzing noises. All of these sounds meant the same thing. They thought the human ship was funny. "This is what they call a warship?" asked Fleet Commander Zaraketh. She was from a race called the Hegemony Alliance. Her body looked like a giant insect, with 4 arms and a head that moved like a praying mantis. "My personal shuttle is bigger than this thing." Captain Morrison stood very still. His face showed nothing. He had gray hair and deep lines around his eyes from years of staring into the black emptiness of space. He had been a soldier and a ship captain for most of his life. He knew when to fight and when to wait. "The hull looks like it was built by children playing with scrap metal," said another alien. This one was from the Crystalline Collective. Its body was made of living rock that changed colors as it spoke. "Do humans really think they can fight wars with such primitive tools?" Outside the meeting station, the human ship Defiant floated in space near the much larger alien vessels. The biggest alien ship was called the Velthari Supremacy. It was over 2,000 meters long and covered in weapons that could destroy entire cities. Next to it, the human ship looked like a small fishing boat next to a giant whale. Lieutenant Amy Parker was on the bridge of the Defiant. She sat at a control station covered in screens and blinking lights. Her job was to watch for enemy ships and listen to radio signals from other vessels. Right now, she was listening to the aliens talk about her ship. "Captain Morrison," she said into her communication device, "the aliens are scanning our hull. They are trying to figure out what our ship is made of." Morrison's voice came back through the speaker. "Let them scan, Lieutenant. Sometimes the best weapon is being underestimated." Back in the meeting room, Ambassador Zixithara was still talking. "The humans joined our galactic community only 50 years ago," she said to the other aliens. "Before that, they had never even left their own solar system. How can they possibly understand real space warfare?" She was right about one thing. Humans had only discovered faster-than-light travel recently. Before that, they had been stuck on Earth and a few nearby planets. The aliens had been traveling between stars for thousands of years. They had fought wars that lasted centuries and built weapons that could crack planets in half. "Perhaps we should end this meeting now," said the rock creature. "There is no point in negotiating with beings who cannot protect themselves. The Proxima colonies should belong to whoever is strong enough to take them." The Proxima colonies were what this meeting was really about. 3 planets near the star Proxima Centauri had been discovered recently. They were perfect for living on with clean air and fresh water. Both humans and aliens wanted to claim these worlds for their own people. Captain Morrison finally spoke. His voice was calm and quiet, but somehow it filled the entire room. "Before you make your final decision," he said, "there is something You should know about human ships. The aliens stopped their laughing and buzzing. They turned to look at the small human captain who dared to speak in their presence. Our ships may look simple to you, Morrison continued, but looks can be very deceiving. Sometimes the most dangerous things come in small packages. Ambassador Zixathera's scales changed color slightly, turning darker. This was a sign that she was becoming angry. Are you threatening us, human? Your entire fleet combined could not defeat one of our escort ships. Morrison smiled, but it was not a happy smile. I am not threatening anyone, Ambassador. I am simply suggesting that you might want to learn more about human history before you make assumptions about human capabilities. He reached into his uniform pocket and pulled out a small device. With your permission, I would like to share some information that might change your perspective on this situation. The alien leaders looked at each other. They were curious now, but also annoyed. How dare this primitive human act like he had something important to teach them? Very well, said Zixathera. Show us your human history. Perhaps it will amuse us while we decide how to divide your colonies among ourselves. Morrison activated his device. A new hologram appeared above the table, but this one was different from the ship display. This one showed a planet covered in lights and enormous structures that reached into the sky like metal mountains. The aliens leaned forward in their chairs. This was not the primitive Earth they expected to see. What you are looking at, Morrison said quietly, is Earth as it appeared 1,000 years ago. 3 months before the meeting with the aliens, Dr. Helen Crawford was working on a planet called Kepler 442b. She was an archaeologist, which meant she studied old things to learn about the past. Helen had always loved mysteries, especially ones that nobody could solve. But what she found on this distant world was bigger than any mystery she had ever imagined. Helen was part of a mining team that was looking for rare metals deep underground. The planet was empty of life, just rocks and dirt and ancient mountains. The mining machines dug deeper and deeper into the ground, following signals that showed valuable materials below the surface. One day, the biggest mining machine stopped working. The drill had hit something that was too hard to break through. The machine operator, a man named Carl Murphy, called Helen over to look at what they had found. Dr. Crawford, Carl said, wiping sweat from his face. You need to see this. The drill hit some kind of metal wall about 200 feet down, but the metal scanner says it goes much deeper than that. Helen climbed down into the mining shaft. The walls were rough stone that had been carved out by the machines. At the bottom, she could see where the drill had stopped. There was a smooth, dark surface that looked like it was made of metal, but not any metal she had ever seen before. She touched the surface with her gloved hand. It was perfectly smooth and warm, even though they were deep underground where everything should be cold. When she pressed against it, lights appeared under her fingers. The lights made patterns that looked almost like writing. Carl, she said, her voice shaking with excitement. This is not natural. Someone built this. Over the next 2 weeks, Helen's team carefully dug around the metal structure. What they found was impossible to believe. The metal wall was actually the top of a huge building that went down into the earth for hundreds of feet. The building was old, much older than any human settlement should be on this planet. Helen called Captain Morrison as soon as she realized what they had discovered. Morrison flew to the planet in a small shuttle as fast as he could. When he arrived, Helen led him down through the passages they had opened into the ancient structure. The inside of the building was amazing. The corridors were wide and tall, with smooth walls that glowed softly with their own light. The air was clean and fresh, as if the building's life support systems were still working after all these years. But the most shocking thing was the writing on the walls. Captain, Helen said as they walked through the corridors, this writing is in English, but it's not modern English. It's written in a style that was used on Earth over 1,000 years ago. Morrison stopped walking and stared at the symbols carved into the wall. He could read most of them, even though the language was old and formal. The words talked about great ships and distant wars and terrible enemies that came from the darkness between stars. They reached a large room filled with computer screens and control panels. Most of the screens were dark, but some still showed information in slow, blinking letters. Chief Engineer Ben Taylor had arrived on the planet that morning, and he was already studying the ancient machines. "Captain Morrison," Ben said, looking up from a control panel, "I've been running tests on this equipment. The technology here is far beyond anything we have today. These computers are still working after 1,000 years, and their processing power is incredible." Ben was a short, stocky man who had spent his whole life working with machines and engines. He understood how things were built and how they worked, but these ancient human machines confused him completely. "Look at this," Ben said, pointing to a screen that showed the design of a spaceship. "This is a blueprint for a vessel that's 12 kilometers long. The engines alone are bigger than our entire ship. And according to these files, this was just one ship in a fleet of thousands." Helen walked over to another section of the room where stone tablets were arranged on metal shelves. The tablets were covered in the same ancient English writing, but these told stories instead of giving technical information. "Captain," she said, reading from one of the tablets, "these records talk about a war that lasted for decades. They call their enemies the Devourers. According to this, the Devourers were creatures that ate entire solar systems, turning everything into empty space." Morrison picked up one of the tablets and read it carefully. The story it told was incredible. Ancient humans had built ships that could travel faster than light and weapons that could destroy planets. They had fought battles in the space between galaxies and won victories against enemies that seemed impossible to defeat. But the most important discovery was in a sealed room at the center of the ancient facility. The door to this room would only open when Helen, Ben, and Morrison all placed their hands on it at the same time. Inside, they found something that would change everything. The room contained the complete history of the ancient human civilization. Thousands of data storage devices lined the walls, each one containing information about ships, weapons, battles, and technologies that modern humans had never dreamed of. "According to these records," Helen said, reading from the central computer, "the humans who built this place were not from Earth originally. They were descendants of humans who had left Earth during a great disaster thousands of years earlier." Computers showed images of Earth as it had been in ancient times. Great cities floated in the sky, connected by bridges of light. Massive space stations orbited the planet like artificial moons. Ships the size of mountains traveled between the stars, carrying millions of people to new worlds. Ben found the technical specifications for the ancient ships. "Captain, the weapons these ships carried could crack planets in half. Their shields could protect them from the explosion of an entire star, and their engines could move them across the galaxy in days instead of years." But the most shocking discovery came when Helen found the personal logs of the ancient commanders. These told the real story of what had happened to the great human civilization and why it had disappeared. "They didn't lose the war," Helen said, her voice barely a whisper. "They won. But the victory changed them into something they didn't want to become. So they chose to destroy their own technology and start over as primitive humans on distant worlds." Morrison stared at the ancient records, understanding finally dawning in his mind. The HSS Defiant and all the other ships in the human fleet were not humanity's first attempt to build warships. They were copies, pale imitations of vessels that had once ruled the galaxy. Outside the ancient facility, the stars continued to shine just as they had for thousands of years. But now 3 humans knew the truth that would soon shake the foundations of galactic civilization. Humanity was not a young race stumbling toward the stars. They were the children of gods who had chosen to forget their own power. Back in the Galactic Council meeting room, the alien leaders stared at the hologram floating above the table. The image showed Earth, but not the primitive planet they expected to see. This Earth was covered with cities that reached into the clouds and bridges of light that connected continents across the oceans. Ambassador Zixthera's scales shifted from green to a darker shade of brown. This was a sign that she was confused and maybe a little worried. "This must be some kind of trick," she said, her voice not as confident as before. "Humans could not have built such things 1,000 years ago." Captain Morrison remained calm. He had practiced this moment many times in his mind during the long journey to the meeting station. "I understand your doubt, Ambassador. What I am about to show you will be difficult to believe." He pressed another button on his device. The hologram changed to show the inside of the ancient facility that Dr. Crawford had discovered. The alien leaders could see the glowing corridors and the advanced computers that still worked after centuries. 3 months ago, our archaeological team found this structure on a planet in the Kepler system, Morrison explained. Everything you see here was built by humans over 1,000 years ago. The carbon dating tests confirm this beyond any doubt. Fleet Commander Zaraketh made a clicking sound with her insect-like mouth. Even if this is real, it proves nothing. Perhaps your ancestors were slightly more advanced than we thought. But they are gone now, and you are what remains. Morrison nodded slowly. You are right, Commander. Our ancestors are gone. But before they disappeared, they left behind records of their achievements, records that explain exactly what they were capable of. The hologram shifted again. This time it showed technical drawings of massive spaceships. The designs were clearly human, with writing in ancient English describing every part. But the size of these ships was incredible. The smallest one shown was over 5 kilometers long. Dr. Helen Crawford's voice came through Morrison's communication device. She was still on the planet with the ancient facility, transmitting information directly to the meeting. Council members, what you are seeing are the original blueprints for the human deep space fleet. These ships were built to fight an enemy we called the Devourers. The aliens around the table began to whisper among themselves in their various languages. The rock creature from the crystalline collective changed colors rapidly, which meant it was thinking very hard about something important. The largest ship in our ancient fleet was called the HSS Retribution, Dr. Crawford continued. It was 12 kilometers long and 3 kilometers wide. Its main weapon could destroy an entire moon with a single shot. Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Barnes stepped forward. She was the human military expert at the meeting, a woman who had studied warfare her entire life. The energy readings from the ancient power cores show output levels that are 50 times greater than our most advanced reactors today. These ships could travel from one end of the galaxy to the other in less than a week. The hologram now showed detailed images of the ancient human weapons. Energy cannons that were larger than entire buildings. Missile systems that could track targets across multiple star systems. Shield generators that could protect a ship from the explosion of a dying star. Ambassador Zixthera stood up from her chair. Her yellow eyes were wide with something that might have been fear. This is impossible. If humans possessed such technology, they would rule the galaxy. Where are these ships now? Morrison's expression became very serious. That is an excellent question, Ambassador. The answer lies in understanding what kind of enemy could force such a powerful civilization to disappear completely. The hologram changed once more. This time it showed space itself, but space that looked wrong somehow. Instead of stars, there were areas of complete darkness that seemed to eat the light around them. These dark zones moved across the galaxy like living things, consuming everything in their path. The Devourers were not like any enemy we had faced before, Morrison explained. They were not a species or a civilization. They were something that existed in the empty spaces between dimensions. They fed on matter and energy, turning entire solar systems into nothing but void. Chief Engineer Ben Taylor's voice joined the transmission from the ancient facility. The records show that the war against the Devourers lasted for 57 years. During that time, human technology advanced at an incredible rate. We developed weapons and defenses that pushed the limits of what was physically possible. The aliens watched in growing silence as the hologram showed battles between human ships and enemies that looked like holes in reality itself. The human vessels fought with weapons that bent space and time, creating explosions that could be seen from other galaxies. By the end of the war, human ships could travel through dimensions that should not exist, Ben continued. Our weapons could rewrite the basic laws of physics in small areas of space. We had become something that was almost godlike in our power. Fleet Commander Zaraketh's forearms began to tremble slightly. If this is true, then why did your civilization fall? What could defeat beings with such capabilities? Morrison was quiet for a long moment before answering. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with sadness. We won the war, Commander. We defeated the Devourers completely. But in the process of becoming powerful enough to win, we realized we had become something terrible ourselves. The hologram showed the final human ships, vessels that barely looked like machines anymore. They seemed to be made of pure energy held together by will alone. The humans who operated them had changed too, becoming beings of light and thought rather than flesh and blood. The records from the war's end are very clear, Dr. Crawford said. Our ancestors looked at what they had become and were horrified. They had gained the power to remake reality itself, but they had lost their humanity in the process. The alien leaders sat in complete silence now. Even their breathing seemed too loud in the massive chamber. So they made a choice, Morrison continued. The most difficult choice any civilization has ever made. They decided to give up their power voluntarily. They destroyed their own advanced technology, scattered their people to primitive worlds throughout the galaxy, and swore that future generations would only rediscover these capabilities when they were wise enough to use them properly. Lieutenant Colonel Barnes stepped closer to the hologram. The ships you see in our current fleet are not our best attempt at building warships. They are training devices designed to slowly reintroduce our species to technologies we once commanded without restraint. The truth hit the alien representatives like a physical blow. The primitive humans they had been mocking were not newcomers to galactic civilization. They were the children of the most powerful species that had ever existed, beings who had voluntarily chosen to become weak in order to remain good. Ambassador Zixthera sat down heavily in her chair. Her scales had turned almost black, which meant she was experiencing deep fear. If what you say is true, then what are you now? Are you still the same species that once commanded such power? Captain. Morrison smiled, but there was no warmth in his expression. That ambassador is exactly what we are all about to find out. The hologram above the meeting table changed again. This time it showed the final battle of the Devourer War, and even the most arrogant alien leaders found themselves unable to look away. Thousands of human ships filled the dark space between galaxies, fighting against an enemy that seemed to eat light itself. Captain Morrison watched the faces of the alien representatives as they saw the true scale of ancient human warfare. Ships the size of cities moved through space like living things, their weapons creating explosions that briefly burned brighter than entire star clusters. The final battle lasted for 3 days, Morrison said quietly. By this time, our ships no longer needed crews in the traditional sense. The humans aboard them had become something between flesh and pure energy. They could think at the speed of light and see across multiple dimensions at once. Ambassador Zixthera stared at the hologram with her yellow eyes wide. Her scales kept changing colors, shifting from black to dark red to brown and back again. How is such a thing possible? No species can evolve that quickly. Dr. Helen Crawford's voice came through the communication system from the ancient facility. Evolution had nothing to do with it, Ambassador. The humans of that time used technology to transform themselves directly. They rebuilt their own bodies and minds to match the power of their weapons. The hologram zoomed in on one of the massive human vessels. Through its transparent sections, the alien leaders could see beings that barely looked human anymore. They were tall and thin, glowing with internal light. Their eyes had become pure white orbs that seemed to contain swirling galaxies. These transformed humans could survive in the vacuum of space without protection, Chief Engineer Ben Taylor explained. They could travel faster than light using only their minds. Some of them could exist in several places at the same time. Fleet Commander Zaraketh's insect-like head tilted to one side. If they were so powerful, why did they need ships at all? Morrison nodded, as if he had expected this question. That is the key to understanding what happened next. By the war's end, the ships were not vehicles anymore. They were extensions of the humans themselves. Each vessel was connected directly to its operator's consciousness. The hologram showed the moment when the last devourer was destroyed. The creature dissolved into nothingness as human weapons tore apart the very fabric of space around it. For a brief moment, the entire galaxy was lit up by the energy released in that final attack. But instead of celebrating, the human ships simply stopped moving. They floated in space like dead things, their weapons powered down, their lights growing dim. The war was over. Morrison continued. Humanity had won the greatest victory in galactic history. The Devourers were gone forever, wiped from existence so completely that even the memory of them almost disappeared. But the cost of that victory was something no one had expected. Lieutenant Colonel Lisa Barnes took over the explanation. The humans who had fought in the final battle tried to return to Earth, but when they arrived, they found they could no longer relate to normal human beings. They had become so advanced that regular humans seemed like insects to them. The hologram now showed Earth after the war. The planet was more beautiful than ever, with floating cities and energy bridges spanning the oceans. But the beings who lived there were no longer recognizable as the humans who had started the war decades earlier. The transformed humans tried to live peacefully, Dr. Crawford said, but their very presence began to change reality around them. Plants grew into impossible shapes near them. Animals developed intelligence overnight. Even the weather began to obey their unconscious thoughts. The alien representatives watched in growing horror as the hologram showed a world where the laws of physics had become suggestions rather than rules. Mountains floated in the air because someone had absent-mindedly wished they could. Oceans turned different colors based on the moods of the beings who looked at them. They realized they had become the very thing they had fought to prevent, Morrison said. They were not destroying matter and energy like the Devourers, but they were changing everything around them whether they wanted to or not. Reality itself was becoming unstable. Ben Taylor's voice became very serious. The records show that some of the transformed humans began to lose their connection to their original nature. They started to think of regular humans as inferior beings, who existed only for their amusement. A few of them began to experiment with reshaping entire planets just to see what would happen. The hologram showed debates in the great council chambers of ancient Earth. The transformed humans argued among themselves about what they should do with their incredible power. Some wanted to rule the galaxy as benevolent gods. Others wanted to continue transforming until they became beings of pure thought with no physical form at all. But there was a third group, and they were the ones who made the decision that changed everything. The wisest among them understood the danger, Morrison explained. They saw that ultimate power, even when used with good intentions, eventually corrupts everything it touches. They proposed something that had never been attempted before in galactic history. Ambassador Zixthera leaned forward in her chair. Despite her fear, she was fascinated by the story. What did they propose? They proposed to give up their power, voluntarily, Morrison said. Not just to limit it or control it, but to destroy it completely and start over as normal humans on distant worlds. The alien leaders looked at each other in amazement. The idea was so alien to them that they could barely understand it. Every species they knew spent their entire existence trying to gain more power, not less. The debate lasted for months. Lisa Barnes continued. But in the end, they decided that the survival of their humanity was more important than keeping their godlike abilities. They chose wisdom over power. The hologram showed the final days of the ancient human civilization. Massive machines worked day and night to dismantle the floating cities and energy bridges. The transformed humans used their incredible technology one last time to scatter their own people across the galaxy, placing them on primitive worlds where they would have to rediscover fire and agriculture. They destroyed every advanced piece of technology they had created, Dr. Crawford said. They erased their own memories of how to build the weapons and ships that had made them invincible. They chose to become weak so that their descendants might one day become strong in the right way. Chief Engineer Ben Taylor added the final piece of the puzzle. But they were not fools. They knew that someday, humanity might need access to their old power again. So they built hidden facilities like this one, designed to activate only when their descendants proved they were ready to handle such responsibility. The alien representatives sat in stunned silence as the full weight of the revelation settled over them. Humanity was not a young species stumbling toward the stars. They were the children of beings who had possessed ultimate power and had chosen to give it up rather than be corrupted by it. Captain Morrison looked around the table at the alien leaders. Now you understand why I said that looks can be deceiving. The HSS Defiant may appear primitive to you, but it carries within it the genetic memory of ships that once ruled the galaxy. He paused, letting his words sink in completely. The question Now is whether you still want to test exactly how much of that ancient power we have remembered. Fleet Commander Zaraketh made the biggest mistake of her life exactly 3 hours after the diplomatic meeting ended. She could not accept that the primitive humans posed any real threat to her mighty fleet. The story about ancient human power had to be lies and tricks designed to make her people afraid. All ships prepare for attack, she commanded from the bridge of her flagship, the Hegemony destroyer. We will show these humans what real power looks like. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge of the HSS Defiant, watching the alien fleet move into attack formation through the main viewing screen. His face was calm, but inside he felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. He had hoped the aliens would listen to reason, but he had prepared for this possibility. "Sir?" "Lieutenant Amy," Parker called from her station. "I'm reading massive energy buildup from all alien vessels. They're charging their main weapons." Morrison nodded slowly. "All crew members prepare for defensive positions. Lieutenant Parker, open a channel to the alien flagship." The main screen flickered and showed Fleet Commander Zaraketh on her bridge. Her 4 insect-like arms moved rapidly over her control panels as she prepared to destroy the human ship. "Commander Zaraketh," Morrison said calmly, "I strongly advise you to reconsider your course of action. You do not understand what you are about to wake up." The alien commander made a harsh clicking sound that was her species' version of laughing. "Your threats mean nothing, human. My ship alone has enough firepower to turn your vessel into space dust." Morrison sighed deeply. "I gave you fair warning, Commander. What happens next is your choice, not mine." The communication ended, and Morrison turned to his crew. "All hands, brace for impact. Chief Taylor, monitor the ship's automatic systems. Lieutenant Parker, record everything that happens for the historical archives." The first attack came from 12 different alien ships at once. Energy beams that could melt through a mountain struck the Defiant's hull with the power of small suns. The entire ship should have been vaporized instantly, but something impossible happened instead. The energy beams hit the hull and simply scattered, like light through a crystal. They spread out in all directions, creating beautiful patterns in space before fading away completely. The Defiant remained completely undamaged. "What just happened?" Lieutenant Parker asked, staring at her instruments, in confusion. Chief Engineer Ben Taylor's voice came through the communication system from the engine room. His voice was filled with wonder and fear. "Captain, the ship is responding to the attack on its own. Systems I've never seen before are coming online automatically." Morrison watched through the viewing screen as the hull of his ship began to change. What had looked like simple metal plates started to shift and move, rearranging themselves in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The surface became smooth and reflective, like liquid mercury that had been frozen in time. "Sir?" "Amy," Parker said, her voice shaking. "My sensors are showing impossible readings. The hull material is existing in multiple dimensions at the same time. According to these readings, most of our ship is no longer in normal space." The alien fleet fired again, this time with even more powerful weapons. Missiles that could track targets across entire star systems launched from hundreds of ships. Energy cannons that could crack planets opened fire all at once. The combined attack was enough to destroy an entire moon. But the weapons could not seem to find their target anymore. The missiles flew through the space where the Defiant should be and continued traveling until they ran out of fuel. The energy beams passed harmlessly through what looked like empty space, even though the human ship was clearly visible to the naked eye. Commander Zaraketh screamed orders at her weapons officers. "Fire everything. Use the planet crackers. Use the star killers. Destroy that ship." The largest alien vessel, the Velthari Supremacy, powered up its ultimate weapon. This was a device that could cause a star to go supernova, destroying entire solar systems. The energy beam that came from this weapon was bright enough to be seen from other galaxies. The beam struck the Defiant directly, and for a moment it seemed like the human ship had finally been destroyed. But as the light faded, the vessel was still there, completely unharmed. Morrison felt something changing inside his own mind. Ancient memories that were not his own began to surface. He could suddenly understand technologies that had been forgotten for 1,000 years. His consciousness expanded beyond the boundaries of his physical body. "Captain," Ben Taylor's voice was different now, deeper and more resonant. "The ship's main reactor is no longer drawing power from our fusion cores. It's tapping directly into the quantum energy of empty space itself. I'm reading power levels. That should be impossible." The Defiant began to return fire, but not with the weapons the aliens expected. Instead of missiles or energy beams, the human ship attacked the mathematical concepts that held matter together. The alien vessels began to come apart at the atomic level, their hulls dissolving like sugar in water. The hegemony destroyer, pride of Zaraketh's fleet, found its quantum shields failing against weapons that attacked the idea's underlying reality itself. The massive warship that had conquered dozens of worlds began to fade away like a bad dream. "This is impossible," Commander Zaraketh screamed as her bridge began to dissolve around her. "Matter cannot be simply erased." Morrison's voice reached her across space, but now it carried harmonics that seemed to come from multiple dimensions at once. "You are correct, Commander. Matter cannot be erased, but it can be convinced that it never existed in the first place." The battle ended not with explosions or debris fields, but with simple silence. One by one, the alien ships stopped existing. They did not explode or break apart. They simply ceased to be, as if the universe had forgotten they were ever there. Only the flagship vessels remained, their crews staring in terror at the human ship that now glowed with internal light. The Defiant had become something that existed partially outside normal reality, visible but untouchable, present but not entirely there. Ambassador Zixthara's voice came through the communication system, her scales now completely white with fear. "Captain Morrison, we surrender, please. We had no idea what we were facing." Morrison's response came from everywhere and nowhere at once. "The lesson is learned, Ambassador. Humanity remembers now what we once were and what we chose to become. We will not make the mistakes our ancestors made, but we will also not allow ourselves to be destroyed by those who mistake mercy for weakness." The glowing around the Defiant began to fade as the ancient systems powered down. The ship returned to normal space, looking once again like the simple vessel the aliens had mocked just hours before. But across the galaxy, on worlds whose names had been forgotten by history, other ancient human facilities began to wake up. Deep beneath the surfaces of distant planets, machines that had slept for 1,000 years started to hum with power. The children of the ancient gods had finally proven themselves worthy of their inheritance. News of the battle spread throughout galactic civilization within days. Every major power began to reassess their understanding of humanity and their place in the galactic order. The species they had dismissed as primitive newcomers were revealed to be the sleeping inheritors of the greatest civilization that had ever existed. And in the depths of space, Captain Morrison stood on his bridge and looked out at the stars. He understood now why his ancestors had chosen to give up their power. The temptation to remake the universe according to human will was almost overwhelming. But he also understood that some lessons could only be learned by walking through darkness and choosing to return to the light. The galaxy would never be the same, but perhaps that was exactly what it needed.